Hello, welcome to Chapter 6 of our Ethics. Today we're talking about client and therapist relationships. First up, we talk about power differential. Basically, the power differential is simply the shift of authority that can exist between the client and the therapist in that relationship. So in our textbook on page 56, it says the difference between the professional's power and the client's powerlessness is called the power differential. Responsible therapist is consciously aware of the dynamics that can happen with this power differential and takes care not to take advantage of the client. So that's very important. We never want to do anything to take advantage of our clients. How the power differential can affect clients. Usually they think that we are all-knowing and that we've studied, which we have, and that we know about the different diseases, different injuries, the healing process. We do, but we're still not allowed to diagnose clients. Most states and many ethical codes state that massage therapists and body workers do not diagnose any type of disease, symptom, or maladies of any type for clients. It can kind of be a difficult situation when you're new to the field. First off, you most likely don't know enough about the medical conditions to understand them fully and fully understand the cause of their symptoms as well. Many symptoms tend to overlap within different situations, different problems, different illnesses. And then second, it can be difficult to explain to a new client that you cannot diagnose health conditions. They think that that they can talk you into telling them what you think or what your opinion is, but you got to be really cautious with that, because anytime you do that, you're technically diagnosing a client, which is illegal. It's out of your scope of practice, and you will lose your license for. So you want to really be cautious about that. Also, it states that the power differential has many dimensions in addition to expectations about disease and symptoms. Clients look to you as someone who they can confide in or someone who can soothe their emotional pain. We are massage therapists, not psychologists or anything like that, or doctors of any type. So we have to be really cautious with that and not cross that boundary. It says also, as a therapeutic relationship develops over time, a therapist will understand more fully why a client wants to receive massage, why the client has pain, and how the client deals with problems and pain. And it's much like fitting together pieces of a puzzle. So the client looks to the therapist to understand what is happening to his or her body and the use of our skills to help make that better. But it's really important. It always goes back to the fact that we cannot diagnose anything. We cannot prescribe anything. We cannot. We can't even really do recommendations outside of basic the RICE method: rest, ice, elevation, compression, or rest, ice, compression, elevation. Sorry. But, yeah, you got to be really cautious about this, and clients, some of them intentionally are trying to get you to diagnose them, and then some of them they just don't know, and they're just desperate for answers. But anytime you have someone that keeps repeatedly asking for a diagnosis or for information on nutrition or a detailed exercise program, or wanting you to basically marriage counsel them, or whatever the situation is, just let them know that you can provide a referral for them to someone else that can handle that situation. Also note down at the bottom, it says because of the power differential, you as a massage therapist have the responsibility to shape and maintain that therapeutic relationship. Our clients take on a passive role in most cases while they're receiving massage. It gives the example: a client feels pain in one shoulder. You begin to assess the situation. You ask questions about how the client uses the arm and the shoulder. The client feels comfortable telling you that the shoulder was injured while playing soccer. You said that the client may be getting too old to play soccer. The client may assume that with your knowledge about the body, you are giving him or her expert advice. So you got to be really careful what you say, even if you're just like joking around and kidding with them. You got to be really cautious, because they can take like the most minor, innocent conversation, and to them it's major and it's triumphant and it's, you know, very powerful, I guess, for lack of a better word. They tend to really, sometimes they tend to really overdo what we say, so we got to be really cautious. Next step talks about how the differential affects the therapist. So it affects the therapist in a variety of ways. First is large responsibility to develop and maintain the therapeutic relationship with our clients, in addition to knowing what techniques to use and what techniques not to use, just as importantly, and how to treat the client. That's a huge responsibility. Second, it can be difficult for the therapist to figure out what the client needs, particularly if the client does not initially give the therapist much information. It says a simple but successful solution to this problem is to check with your client as frequently as possible. Obtaining feedback from your client throughout the session helps you know how your techniques are working and encourage the client to take part in their own healing process. It's very important that we remember that we're not technically healers. We're here to assist the body in healing. We're not like the great miracle worker that many of our clients see us as. We just know techniques and treatments that we can do to assist the body. Ultimately, the body heals itself. We don't do the healing. So be really cautious about when you call yourself a healer. Yes, we are, but we simply facilitate assisting the body in healing itself. So in that sense, we're not, if that makes any sense to anyone. Next step talks about finding the safe and professional ground. Assumptions about what we think of our clients, in contrast, can be one of the most dangerous aspects of the power differential with clients. So be careful. Never judge your clients. You don't truly know their situation until you live in their shoes. And that's something that's really important, especially for young massage therapists starting out, to realize that you never know what's really going on behind closed doors, or, you know, at home life, their work life. You never know truly how someone experiences pain or grief, or, you know, everybody's different. So just remember that. Never judge anyone. Never criticize anyone. Your job is to be loving and supportive within limits. Back to our text, it says a therapist needs to address the client's needs session by session. So with that, it's talking about basically what they needed in the session a month ago may not be the same thing that they need in the session today. So even though it's the same person, even though it's the same pain or the same problem area, every session is going to be different. So make sure you don't lock yourself into doing the same thing every time. Ethically speaking, it's not acceptable for you to decide what your client needs. If you have suggestions for a client, an open dialogue is important before the session begins to help you and the client reach a mutual agreement. We suggest the treatment plan that we're going to do, and ultimately it's up to our clients to decide, you know, do they want deep tissue even though we say they need it, or do they want Swedish even though we say they should do deep tissue. You know, you've got to kind of ultimately leave that up to them, because it is their body. And clients will appreciate you for asking and realize you're focusing on them too. So that's a very important thing. Okay, the most effective way to find safe and professional ground is to communicate well with your client. It's all about communication, not just, you have the verbal communication, yes, that's very important, but you should also be looking for those nonverbal signs. And we talked about that before, the fidgeting on the table, being restless, clenching their fist or their jaw, bouncing their foot. All those can be signs of distress. So watch for those as well, not necessarily paying attention only to the verb, to what the client says. Pay attention to how the client's body is reacting. Simple questions such as how are we doing or how do you feel can open communication lines for our clients to tell us how they feel. You always want to ask open-ended questions, meaning you don't want to ask yes or no type questions. You want to ask for information that where they're going to have to, or ask the question in a way that they're going to have to provide some sort of information to you other than a yes or a no or okay or good or bad, or you want more response than that. So ask open-ended questions. It says, how are we doing? How do you feel? These are considered to be open-ended questions because they can't answer that with just like a one-word reply. Or if they do, then you ask the question in a different way. Can you explain to me how that feels? Or can you explain to me why you feel it's too much work, or why you feel it's not enough or not deep enough? Always make sure whenever you do get a yes or no or a simple answer, make sure you kind of investigate that a little more with your clients, just to be sure everybody's on the same page. So another example, open-ended questions down on the bottom says, you indicated on your intake form that you have headaches. Are these migraines? So that's a yes or no question. Yes, they're migraines. No, they're not migraines. So a better way to rephrase that would be, can you tell me about your headaches? So it's all in the way you word your questions with clients. And it'll take you a little while to kind of get used to the slang, I guess, if you will. Excuse me. But as soon as you do kind of start catching on with it, and you do start making yourself aware of when you are asking open-ended questions versus when you're asking closed-ended questions, it'll really help you become a better therapist. So key points: clients look to professionals as experts in what we do. Responsible therapists use power differential in a responsible, ethical manner, serving the needs of the client. The client's needs always come first. And then communication is an important tool for maintaining therapeutic balance within the power differential. That's very important as well. So next, we talk about defense mechanisms. Defense mechanisms are involuntary behaviors that unconsciously protect a person or help minimize unwanted or unacceptable feelings or thoughts. So, one way to look at that is whenever you have someone that is exhibiting examples of a defense mechanism, they're trying to usually change the subject, or they're trying to get you to work a different area, and they don't even really realize that they're doing it or why they're doing it. They just know something doesn't feel right. So you got to be cautious with that and know that that's a defense mechanism. Behaviors that protect a person that are triggered by an unconscious feeling or thought is a defense mechanism. Also, involuntary acts that help us minimize unwanted or unacceptable feelings and thoughts. A lot of times body work can trigger defense mechanisms. We start working on an area that has a associated memory with it, and our client starts trying to, they either have an emotional release, or they'll start, by emotional release, they start laughing uncontrollably or crying, or start really sighing. A lot of heavy sighing is another example of an emotional release occurring. And we'll go more into that later, so I'm not going to really divulge into that right now. But main thing, communication with your client and feedback from your client is essential for both parties, you and the client, to both be able to cope with the defense mechanisms. But again, within limits. You've got to remember that we're not therapists. We're not here to analyze our clients. So you've got to be cautious about whenever you work with someone that is exhibiting a defense mechanism. Sorry guys, I don't know what is going on with my throat today. Okay, so it's important to be aware of constant interchange of feelings, thoughts, emotions, and energy between you and your client. This interchange begins with the first conversation you have with a new client on the phone, and it continues throughout each session. An example of a physical interchange is the work a therapist performs along with the client's reaction to areas that are painful or have reduced range of motion. Therapists may feel spasms or adhesions and then physically adjust the technique being used. Also, remember that tissues have memory and store emotion. So some people call these tissue issues. I don't really like that term, but that is one, according to the book, that some people, a term that some people use for it. But it's just basically when there's a stored emotion in that particular area you're working on. Okay, clients may respond to treatment by crying, seeming sad, giggling, showing anger, or a client may physically act out and fidget or grab the table. If such a reaction begins, it's important for the therapist to communicate with the client. Anytime the client shows emotional or physical reaction, it's important to work only within the client's comfort level. So you got to be checking in with your client. Are you okay? Is the pressure okay? Are you comfortable? Do you feel comfortable with continuing the session? Even is an important question to ask your client. So tips for checking in with your client. You want to, whenever they seem to be upset or uncomfortable, you can ask one or several of the following questions. Is that area really sore? What is your pain level right now? Have you had a recent injury to this area? Are you feeling pain anywhere else? Would you like for me to work lighter? And would you like for me to stop working in this area or stop working altogether? Again, ultimately it has to be up to the clients. Key points. Defense mechanisms are involuntary acts to help minimize unwanted or unacceptable feelings or thoughts. Body work can easily trigger defense mechanisms, and communication with clients and feedback from our clients can help both parties cope with the defense mechanisms better. So that takes us into our next topic, transference. So transference is a client's projection of thoughts and feelings about another person onto the therapist. It's a common occurrence. It happens with your clients in many ways. It can occur in any relationship in which you're involved and is generally an unconscious process. So transference, again, is an unconscious process most of the time. The very nature of the therapeutic relationship allows transference to happen easily. Bodywork can trigger a variety of emotions from a client, such as anger, frustration, sadness, fear, or joy. These feelings are generally the result of some emotion the client felt in the past toward another person. And typically, like with transference, that's usually like comments that they'll say that kind of let you know that there's some transference going on. They'll talk about how you remind them of their mother or daughter or grandmother or best friend or aunt or, whatever the situation is, that you remind them of someone else. You need to recognize that the client's reaction may be a result of transference, and it may help you understand why the client's acting in a particular way. It's not necessarily a good memory or a bad memory. They just know that you remind them of someone or some situation, or maybe it's the music that puts them links them to a certain state. We try to use music in massage therapy that it's not really real common everyday music that your client's going to be listening to at home or on their way to and from work. We try to do relaxing, soothing music. I've actually had one client, that had an emotional outbreak because she said that the music reminded her of her father's funeral. So with that client, I made note of it in my charts, and then from that point on, anytime that client was coming in, I got to see that chart and see that, don't play that type of music. So, I even had her bring in a CD that she liked, that she preferred to listen to during her massage. And, that was another alternative option for her. Therapeutic relationships can become unhealthy and negative if either the client or the therapist cannot cope with the transference. And sometimes it may be, like I said, totally innocent. It may be you remind them of their mother or their grandmother or their daughter. And then other times it can be, not so innocent, where You remind them of a ex-partner maybe that they had a bad breakup with or something, or or they may be just attracted to you, and it's not necessarily that they're attracted to you, it's that transference occurring. But from time to time they will truly be attracted to you, and that can become a problem in that situation if the client cannot control themselves and continues to tell you that they're attracted to you, or continues to ask you out on dates, that kind of situation. You'll want to end that therapeutic relationship for the safety of yourself and your client. And you can always refer them to someone else, either within the same practice as you or to another therapist outside of your practice if that works out better. But you never want to allow the transference to continue, because then it kind of just grows and grows and it becomes a big monster before you even realize it. So exercise 6-1, I want you to pause here and do that, and also answer the questions on the scenario, and then we'll move on to transference by clients. So to wrap up transference, we did talk about transference by clients, but make sure to note the signs of transference at the bottom after you do exercise 6-1 and the scenario questions. Signs of transference: the client's voice may change, either it gets loud or it gets softer or it gets shaky. The client's attitude may change. You'll notice it can be a subtle change, or it can be a very obvious change in their attitude or their personality. They begin to laugh or cry, as we said. They can tense up or start kind of pulling away while you're working a specific area. Sometimes they'll sigh and relax and begin to breathe more quickly, or they'll tense up. These are all signs of transference occurring. Clients generally do not tell the therapist they're having a negative response to body work, or may not even be aware of it themselves. So again, it's really important, if you see signs of transference, you want to start that communication with them to find out really what is going on. Make sure the client is okay, make sure they're good with continuing. Receiving positive transfers from a client can be very flattering to a therapist. It feels good to receive praise and compliments from your clients. However, you have to know that it's important to manage the aspect of the therapeutic relationship. This can be challenging, or even be challenging for anyone, but especially for new therapists. So you want to be cautious about that. So exercise 6-2, I want you to pause and do it, and then we'll move on to managing transference. Okay, so with managing transference, it says transference by the client may occur naturally in the therapeutic relationship in positive or a negative way, and managing both reactions can enhance the therapeutic relationship. So it's all about maintaining those boundaries and protecting the therapeutic relationship. Understand that the transference is taking place and the client's reactions are related to another person or an event. Can help you avoid taking the reaction personally. It gives the example: you're working on a client's upper back and they suddenly tense up and become very agitated. Reaction may not be from your work at this time, but it may actually be a reaction from a past event, such as being abused or mistreated in some way. And then words and touch can evoke dramatic response from a client. In most cases, the therapist has no previous warning that such a response will occur. Sometimes they'll even start yelling at you and stuff. I've never experienced that personally, but I have heard of other therapists who've had situations where the client just started really degrading her. She really didn't know what it was about or anything, but then come to find out, it was actually transference occurring, form of negative transference. So a couple of things to watch for: changes in the client's body, just the tensing up, the fidgeting, the sighing, turning their head from side to side, Also changes in their emotional state, such as crying, laughing, or suddenly talking really obsessively, or suddenly stop talking really obsessively. Client asking for special considerations, such as changing your schedule or your fees. A client trying to socialize the therapeutic relationship, wanting more personal relationship with you. Clients asking you out on a date, asking you to go to lunch, asking you to, go to the bar with her and her girlfriends or something, trying to pull you into their social circle is also a sign of transference, so watch for that. Also, the client crossing a physical boundary, such as touching you or needing a hug at the end of a session. Now, some people are just huggers. I'm just a hugger. I don't think anything by it, but I have to be really cautious with it towards my clients because it's a therapeutic relationship. It's a professional relationship. Also, a client becoming too personal, telling you too much information. This can be in regards to their social life, their dating scene or their marital problems. That, yes, it's fine to listen. Just don't give advice. Don't make suggestions for them, and then tell them that you can suggest a counselor for them to see if they would like to pursue those lines of questions further. Okay, what to do when you have a client showing transference. You want to check in with the client. Ask how they're doing. If the client's physically pulling away, ask the client if you should lighten the pressure or work in a different area. If the client is exhibiting an emotional response, asking what the client needs or if they need a moment to relax. Sometimes changing the work you're doing will give the client time to process what's happening. Sometimes, I've had to actually, the client just needed a moment alone in the room, and I've had to step out for a moment and then come back in, and we were able to finish the massage. It's really important, though, to be very cautious when you're dealing with transference. You don't want to cross any lines or boundaries, and you can't allow the client to cross any lines or boundaries either. So another thing to do, if they're having a serious response, you ask them if they need to stop the session and continue. We just lost our slide. Okay. And then if you suspect they're having an overwhelming issue, a referral for a counselor or psychological therapist can be appropriate. And keep the relationship professional. And then if the client becomes too physical, you can avoid being touched. For example, after the session is over, wait behind the desk so the client can't come up to hug you. One way to deal with that. And then next it talks about what not to do. So don't try to help the client resolve an emotional issue. It's out of our scope of practice, and again, you could lose your license for it. Do not tell the client to forget about the issue for now. It may be important to allow the client to work through the response that's brought to the surface by massage. So let them kind of work through it on their own. And don't be abrupt in your response. In many cases, clients do not realize this is happening. So subtle changes in your approach and demeanor can let a client know that your boundaries have been crossed. If a client does not get the subtle approach, then just a direct approach is best. Key points. Transference takes place in most therapeutic relationships. Do not take the transference reactions personally. Focus on your client's reactions and work in a place that feels safe for both you and the client. And then communicate with and obtain feedback from your client. So now we have countertransference. So transference is when the client projects a negative or positive feeling onto us. Countertransference is when we project a positive or negative feeling onto a client. Positive or negative feelings are unconsciously projected to the client through our hands, through our touch. If we are sexually attracted to a client, the client can usually feel that. Our hands, our touch is different. If we feel sorry for a client, or if we're mad at a client, or if we're just frustrated with life itself that day, be sure to note that when you touch your client, they can usually feel those emotions. They can pick up on that, so be cautious about that. That's a sign of countertransference, or a form of countertransference. Also, the therapist should do a self-inventory when the therapeutic relationship is not working or it's at risk. Make sure, that you don't overstep your boundaries, and make sure that everything's intact with you. Countertransference leads to reactions of the therapist to something the client says or does. It gives the example, if as a child you spent time with an aunt who constantly complained about her boss and you hated listening to her, you may react with the same attitude towards a client that complains about her boss during the massage session. The same factors can trigger a client's transference, can also trigger transference for a therapist, countertransference. The client's tone, voice, and attitude all influence how we react to them. It says box 6-4 lists some very simple signs to suggest countertransference is occurring. So with that, it talks about negative transference. This is not looking forward to a client's session, dreading it, feeling drained after a client's session, not being able to focus on a client, and wanting the session to be over with quickly. These are all signs of negative transfer or countertransference, sorry. And then signs of positive countertransference include really looking forward to a client's session, getting excited about it, or excessively happy that they're, are on the books, or that they are on your table, also becoming too involved with the client and not wanting a session to end is another sign of a positive countertransference, but it still can be dangerous. You've got to really watch yourself. Talked about how negative countertransferences, they can actually be even more dangerous than a positive countertransference. But you need to really watch yourself, because that's a very common reason why we lose clients. Clients come to receive bodywork sessions to feel better. If the therapist reacts to a client in a negative manner, the client will likely feel that his or her needs are not being met. Gives an example. A client may remind you of a former friend with whom you are still angry because of some past conflict. So unconsciously, your feelings for this former friend affect your attitude toward your client and how you deal with that client. So you got to really be cautious, really put yourself in check, make sure you know what's going on with you, and be aware. It's our responsibility as the professional to be aware of the signs of both transference and countertransference, and to protect ourselves and our client. Knowing the relationships can involve transference or countertransference helps you know when something in the therapeutic relationship is not right. So step back and look at why the relationship is no longer focusing on the client, and try to see what behaviors may have triggered your response to the client. If you do not feel you can handle the situation, you need to talk with a mentor or an appropriate healthcare provider about what steps to take to improve the therapeutic relationship. And again, sometimes you just have to end the therapeutic relationship. Just as our clients can be attracted to us, sometimes we can be attracted to them, and that's never a safe situation. We lose our license if we start dating or having a non-therapeutic relationship with our client, I guess. So steps for managing countertransference. You want to take inventory of yourself and your relationship with your client. List the reasons why this person is your client. Write down any emotional issues you're having with the client, such as, the client makes me feel angry when he whines about his pain. Think about whether you have had similar emotional issues with someone in your past life, such as Aunt Sally complaining about her work or her boss or her pain. Try to separate your feelings or emotions so that the treatment plan is attainable. Aunt Sally may have made you mad, but your client is truly in pain. And then finally it says, remember why the client has come to you. Write down some positive affirmations to use when you work with your client in the next session. And positive affirmations are huge. I do this all the time in both my professional life and my personal life. Affirmations are just little things you say to yourself to remind yourself that you are beautiful, you are strong, you are successful. That could be your client is, could be an affirmation for a client, could be that, let's see, I don't want to say you love your client, you understand your client is in pain, so therefore you are going to do everything within your therapeutic relationship to reduce their pain. Just both countertransference and transference can be managed when the therapist is aware of it, so you've got to just really be kind of watching out for yourself and your clients. Key points: a therapist may transfer negative or positive feelings to a client, which is countertransference. Negative or positive feelings are unconsciously projected to the client through the therapist's hands. And again, the therapist should do a self-inventory when the therapist relationship is not working or it's at risk. Moving on to dual relationships. A dual relationship occurs when two people have two different kinds of relationships overlapping. Typically, two people have both a social and a professional relationship. At some time during their careers, most professionals will experience a dual relationship, whether it's with other business people, clients, or patients. Such as a doctor may meet someone at a social function and form a social relationship. That person may then realize the doctor is appropriate for the treatment of a particular condition he or she has, and then becomes a patient. The doctor and the patient now have a social and a professional relationship. So they have a dual relationship. So social relationships are common with professionals and often are very casual. Gives the example: a professional may simply see a client or patient occasionally at social functions. And then other social relationships may become more personal, however, potentially causing conflicts between the two relationships. At such times, it's good to have guidelines in place for handling situations that can arise in order to maintain professional relationship with the client. Okay, so you've got a couple of case studies here. I'm sure you've already read that. Professional dual relationships, we talked a little bit when you have professionals that find it important to network with other professionals. So like professional dual relationships could be like when we promote a special with another massage therapist, or we do an event session together, or when we are networking with doctors and physical therapists, outside of the massage relationship. Like one professional forms a business relationship with another, and each may choose to use services of the other. Frequently, a dual relationship begins to develop as two professionals form a professional relationship after having first met socially and establishing a social relationship. Always remember that in dual relationships, each party is seeking something. You may be seeking networking opportunities or using another business for services that you need. The other person may also be seeking networking and may need massage therapy services. This is a give and take situation, so you have to remember to, again, be cautious about that and know what the expected relationship is. If you feel a dual relationship is becoming problematic, develop a plan to work it out with the other party before it gets out of hand. Guidelines for successful professional dual relationships. Identify the nature of both relationships. Is it business? Is it personal? Is it social? Or a combination of all three or two of them? Identify why you have each of the relationships. Determine the importance of both relationships to you and to the other professional. Identify any potential risks or problems that may arise. Work with the client to determine what the focus for your session should be, and determine ways that you can remain objective and exercise good judgment. And then it gives warning signs of a troublesome dual relationship. The relationship seems one-sided. You feel you've lost your objectivity. A conflict of interest has developed. You question whether you're providing competent care. You feel vulnerable, or you've begun to resent the other party. Next, we talk about personal dual relationships. A dual relationship that involves a more personal relationship are generally more complicated than business relationships because of their nature with the personal matter. People generally invest much emotion in their personal relationships, yet it's still important that you set your boundaries clearly for the professional side of the relationship. You want to be firm but fair, treating everyone the same to avoid problems. A lot of times family can kind of take advantage of you, and friends as well. So you got to be cautious about that, and don't let them get by with anything you wouldn't let someone else get by with. The same basic principles hold true for business relationships and personal relationships. Knowing that there is a risk for conflicts, set your boundaries initially to help prevent problems. It's also important to address all boundary issues listed in box 6-8 with family members and friends, and communicate your boundaries to these individuals and explain that these are important issues not only for you but for the profession. So those boundaries are boundary issues with family and friends. They're asking you to give them extra time. They're asking for a discount. They're asking you to work on days or times when you don't normally work. Wanting you to make special exceptions for them. They're asking for techniques in which you're not trained. They're asking you to change their records. They're asking for a massage at their house or other settings. They're asking for advice on other health issues outside of your scope of practice. Okay, moving on to making dual relationships work. Tips for dual relationships. Know that dual relationships can and will happen. Set your boundaries clearly. Keep consistent in your policies and actions. Communicate your boundaries. Be alert for the warning signs of problems. Find solutions as soon as they occur. Don't let stuff sit there and fester. And don't wait and hope the problem will resolve itself. That's probably the most dangerous thing you can do. Okay, so now you have exercise 6-3 on page 70. We'll pause here and let you do that, but before we'll go over the key points again. Dual relationships will occur. Successful dual relationships require boundaries, and family and friends will inadvertently test your boundaries and policies in regards to dual relationships. So complete all your exercises as well as your scenarios for this chapter and your quiz, and then we'll continue on with sexuality.